Well, give the people what they want. I kind of thought I'd covered this subject adequately by talking about the Siege Optimus in a lot of instances. Plus, there was the time I did the review of the oversized KO. But I guess not, because I constantly get questions as to why I love the Siege Prime so much, especially when I don't much care for the Earthrise version. It's because it's better, and that's not just me being obstinate. That's not just me trying to stick it to the Earthrise figure once more, even though it would deserve it for being a Voyager with a $2 trailer that was sold as a leader. Real talk, that figure is not more complex than this one. It is not made out of better materials than this one. It does not have a higher parts count than this one. I mean, just look at the legs. It doesn't have more paint. It's literally not doing anything more than this one. And yet, it's a leader, while this is better. And you know how I know that this is better? Because I was hyping the ever-loving shit out of this thing before I ever got a hold of it. I spent literal hours in the lead-up to this figure looking at the renders of this thing, trying to figure out how it transformed, and just hyping myself crazy. I loved everything about what I was seeing, and that is a complete and total recipe for disaster. This thing should have come out and completely failed to meet my expectations. All that insane hype I was giving this thing should have poisoned my opinions of it. But when it came out, not only did it not fail to match up with all of the hype I'd been giving it, but it exceeded my expectations. How the hell did Siege Optimus do that, when the Earthrise version crashes and burns? Well, for starters, this has monstrously better proportions than the Earthrise figure. While the arms are the same length, and the hips and waist are in the same locations, and he's even overall the same height, his legs are actually shorter, and therefore more correct. With the Earthrise version, the hips are actually part of the legs, whereas here, the hips are a separate piece and the legs are mounted beneath that, leaving this much more natural in its build, as it's not the hyper-long-legged freak of the Earthrise version. It's such a small change, and yet it makes an absolute world of difference. It means that this thing has natural proportions, while that thing is an absolute mutant with legs that overall come across a third longer than they naturally should be. Also, I don't know where to put this in this video because I don't really have a section for it, but this thing feels amazing in your hands. I don't know what it is about it, but this thing just feels great to the touch. I've had many a subscriber tell me that they don't understand why I say this, only to message me later with the phrase, "I get it now." Just everything about the way it moves is smooth and creamy, and the materials it's made out of just feel sturdy and, for lack of a better word, creamy again. Optimus is creamy in my hands. This is one of the most pleasant figures I've ever had the joy of handling, and you can't really understand that until you hold one of these and just know what I mean. This was also one of our first looks at a G1 but cyber-stylized character, and it just works out better here than on most other figures. Everything is so boxy and angular, I just love it. Plus, he's got loads of weird and neat details, like the legs having the wheels pointing forwards and the flank tires, as well as the cool cyber detail on the boob windows. And I much prefer the arms here. The Earthrise has horribly stubby-looking arms. If you pay attention to where the hands fall, they pretty much end up where they are supposed to, but they still look wrong. And it's not just because it's juxtaposed with the legs that are too long, like I've already outlined. It's because the Earthrise has much longer shoulders and much shorter biceps. It gives the impression that he goes from shoulder directly to elbow, and it's just weird. Honestly, if they didn't make the shoulders rectangles, it would have worked out better, like on the Siege here. The arms look so much more proportional to his body, it's another really simple change that makes a world of difference. Now, a lot of people have expressed to me how strange they find it that I hate faux forming grills on Optimus so much, and just faux forming in general, yet I seem to give this figure a pass when it's a prime example of it. The answer is pretty simple. I hate faux forming when it's used to cheat. I hate that 99% of the time the only reason the faux forming happens is to move a part of the alt mode somewhere else on the robot mode because the designers couldn't be bothered to figure out how to get the part where it needed to go naturally. So I despise it when they do that. But there are other reasons to do faux forming. There are things only faux forming can do. Because there will never be a point where we can incorporate shrink rays into the figures, mass shifting can only be achieved through faux forming, by including different sized parts meant to represent aspects of the alt mode. And another thing that only faux forming can do is material changes. This may surprise you, but alchemy is not a thing. And if you want to turn parts chrome or clear or matte or whatever different than they already are, then it needs to be done with faux forming. And that's what's happening with this figure. Honestly, I guess what it boils down to is that faux forming is a fine tool to be in a designer's repertoire, but it is one that is normally misused. So yes, here I am fine with a faux forming grill. I can't believe I'm saying that, but it is the truth this time. Also, this one is going to be very subjective, but like I always say, I actually really liked the Siege battle damage. I thought it was super cool, and this figure has some of my favorite. I've heard it bothers people that it's only on the front, but that's where that would happen, right? You don't tend to get scraped up on your back while running forward into battle. Look, I just find that this stuff captures my imagination. I get that it's not super popular, but for me, this is a great point of the figure, and you all asked why I like this so much. Anyways, not only is the battle damage great, but the rest of the paint in general is well done too. From the toes to the wheels to the auto badge to the grill abs and white stripe, this is a clean and punchy deco with a lot of effort and care on display. But it's not all sunshine and roses with old Optimus here. For starters, his shoulder pipes are goofy. These are just an odd shape, the porthole in them does not help improve the look, and honestly, I think there had to have been a better way to handle these than a door that opens and gets stuck every time, so you constantly have to manually close it yourself. Plus, the baggy wrist kibble is a sight to behold. I mean, that's pretty egregious. I can think of several ways to have handled this that look better, and none of them would have been particularly hard. We do know from the knockoff that at least one of them would have made the transformation less satisfying, but the rest could easily have stood to have been used. Hell, even if it was just putting this on a track that slides back, cause the baggy cuff would have been way better than the baggy elbow. The head on this figure is great, though the neck is perhaps maybe a bit swole. I will say that I do find myself loving this head a little less after being subjected to the absolute torture of the Netflix War for Cybertron trilogy Optimus. The blithering idiot. But when this came out, this was awesome. There are definitely some things about this that aren't proportionally quite right, like the antennae are a little too thick, especially towards the top, and the eyes seem to be a little out of sorts, but for the most part, this is a very solid Optidome, and hey look, it's fully painted unlike the Earthrise Primes. Plus he's got Sad Robot Man on the back of his head. And what more can you ask for than Sad Robot Man? But for a Chug Optimus, this head rules. It's only off by fractions, and it's pretty much everything I could ask for. That said, I really wish later Optimuses weren't so lazy and just stopped copying this thing's head. The designers were so indolent, reusing this thing over and over ever since, and less well painted every time afterwards. Shared engineering is fine when it's like the thighs or the feet or arms, but when it gets to the face, you have crossed a line. Also, the Earthrise Optimus stole this figure's legs but ruined them by removing like all the transforming bits and yet keeping the hinges. It even has a pin that implies moving parts, but nope. So yes, the look on this thing isn't perfect, it's really good, but it has some issues, but every problem it does have I can wave off as being part of the cyber-stylized design for the Optimus. From the baggy sleeves to the backpack, it all at least feels like it was incorporated into the design of the figure. As for the accessories, Optimus here doesn't come with a lot, and we will be talking about even less of it because I honestly seem to have lost his axe. And besides that, you already saw me talk about that in the knockoff review because it was the only thing that came with. Suffice it to say, I don't like it, and I think Optimus needs fewer axes. But I also don't like this gun. It's just kind of really, really crappy. They might have been aiming for a cyber version like the rest of the figure, but the end result is an awkward, bulbous, gappy gun that looks like a bad cosplay prop made out of styrofoam packaging inserts. Poseability on this, for as much as I love it, might not be as good as you are expecting. Above average head with cheating for massive look down, shoulders that go out to like 89 degrees, and I think I might stop mentioning that you can cheat it unless it's either limited or you can't, since it's common to the point where you should expect it. The traditional Optimus Prime backwards butterflies, elbows pull a couple more degrees than a 90, wrist swivs, kind of technically a really weird back crunch, hips are very limited going forward and back, but off to the side they're fine, thigh and knee rotation, almost maximum knees, and solid ankle pivot with toe down. So let's be clear here, this is good poseability, well above average, though not amazing, and yet it feels even better than it is. It feels amazing. The joints and the tolerances all just love working with you, and it feels like the figure wants to help you do anything you're trying. There is not one disagreeable joint on this thing, and it's an uncommon experience. You really need to get one of these in hand to understand how joyful it is to mess around with. And then there's the transformation, and oh baby, this is a top tier transformation. People like to hold up the Earthrise as some kind of shining example of transformation, and in fairness, it is an awesome one, but no, the Siege is better, it's just better. More parts on this thing are doing more. Every step of it is involved from the torso to the legs, unlike the Earthrise, where basically everything from the waist down does basically nothing. All of it is inventive and clever. I just love how the whole front end of the truck essentially explodes apart, and everything connects and tabs together so smoothly and satisfyingly. Though getting the kneecaps up does suck. You are probably going to pop those off before they come out, and you will hurt your fingers. That is the one blemish on this awesome transformation. And I just love this alt mode so much. People like to whine that it's not spacey enough, but it's not supposed to be a space alien bioship or something. The point was to be cyberpunk. Too many Cybertronian alt modes are just bricks on wheels for my tastes. It's lame, it's just boring that way. They either need to go bonkers with it, like Bumblebee's flying saucer mode or the Tetrajets, or they need to go with something a lot more understandable, like Wheeljack's hovercraft mode, or like this, a Cybertruck with all of the headlights! For me, this thing is just so sick looking. I kind of forgot the weird warm and fuzzies the Siege aesthetic used to give me. The design philosophy really just has my number. It's hard to even put into words how much I like this. And it's so much more cohesive than the Earthrise version. People love talking about how perfect the Earthrise alt mode is, but does it bother no one that like halfway down the cab it just stops and turns into his thighs, completely blowing up the sculpt of the damn thing. And then there's the huge gap in the back, which this has to an extent, but it's much more intentional looking. I also love the little details that they changed to give this its own personality, like the eyebrow lights and the rain skirts over the rear wheels, which have a whole dedicated extra step to flipping to the other side of the legs and exposing the tires. And just everything about that is just so satisfying in ways that are hard to explain. So admittedly, a lot of what I find so satisfying about this figure, what makes me love it so much, is subjective. It's doing stuff that appeals to me. I like its aesthetic, I like what it turns into, I like the battle damage. And then some of it is subjective in a more esoteric sense. Everyone I've ever talked to who owns one of these loves the way it feels, but at the same time you have to feel this thing to understand. It's not just something that you can point to on paper and have people get that's why it's good. But then there's a lot of objectively good about this figure on top of that. The design, while not everyone's specific cup of tea, is objectively a good one. The materials are fantastic. The poseability is well above average. The paint is cleaner and of equal or greater amount than the Earthrise. The transformation is a brilliant experience, so well engineered, and the alt mode is good and incredibly cohesive. And once again, even if you feel like it's not spacey enough, there is no denying that it is a good design and achieving the cyberpunk aesthetic they were going for well. Plus, you know it's not $20 more than it had any right to be. These are equivalent figures, with the Siege actually being the better, higher effort one, and yet the Earthrise was almost double the price. And that's just not right. Believe me when I tell you that not only have many people told me that I'm crazy to like this thing over the Earthrise, only to then buy one on my recommendation and then message me that I was right, but also, while I was writing this video, I literally received a tweet from a subscriber telling me that they just got the Siege Prime and now it is their favorite figure. I'm not exaggerating how good this thing is. You should buy one. And that's not half what I have to say, but it's enough what I have to say. And I know you know what everyone else tells you to do at the end of these videos. So, if you liked what you saw here, please do that. And if you'd like to take it a step further, then please share this video with any friend you think may be interested. I hope you all enjoyed listening to me waste your time.